All right, so there was a gap of time between moving out of my dad's house and before I got the car. There was several months there. I'm not sure exactly how long it was, but it was quite a while. After realizing, my brother and I both, after realizing that we were no longer wanted there at the home, and we didn't want to stay there anymore because of what was going on there. There was some bad things going on there. We couldn't stay there anymore. It wasn't really a safe place at that point for us to be at. It wasn't a healthy place for us to be at. And in our minds, being anywhere else was probably better than staying there. So we were on our own. And we ended up together initially living with some families and stuff. A lot of our families of our high school wrestling teammates. And initially that's what happened, but then we broke off and he ended up staying with his friends' families and I ended up staying with my friends' families, and that's kind of where that all started. And this was before I got the car. I didn't have the car yet. So we bounced around from home to home to home to home, and people took us in. They didn't have to, they didn't have to. There was no obligation for any of these people to take us in. They fortunately said yes to letting us stay there. But the thing of it is, as grateful as I am, and I was at the time, and I'm even more grateful now when I think back. Good old hindsight, is 2020, they say, and I think that's the reason why people came up with that idiom, because it truly is. It truly is. It's getting a little windy out here right now. The camera's moving around, but the thing of it is, as much as I appreciated everybody doing everything, most every single time, with the exception of one family, which is another video, that's coming up, with the exception of one family, every situation, every home that I was in, it was always temporary. It was a temporary gig. I could stay temporarily. And my friends told me that. I never talked to the parents, if at all. It was like, I would talk to my friends, they would talk to their parents, it was the domino effect. It's kind of a trickle-down thing. And my friend would say, okay, you can stay for a couple of days, you can stay for a week, maybe 2 weeks at the most, but like a month or something like that. Now we're getting into kind of permanent residency here. And as much, I was to say, as kind as people were to take me in, a 16-year-old kid in Alaska, a kid that was, in high school, trying to just get through high school, it was very kind and compassionate of them. But at the end of the day, for me personally, it was temporary. And I was told that up front oftentimes. And sometimes maybe it was after 3 or 4 days, my friend would say, come to me, and I knew he had talked to his parents, and he would say, you can only stay till next Friday or whatever, or next weekend. So the thing for me, what that caused in me was a lot of anxiety, because now I had to start looking for another place to stay. And it got harder and harder and harder to do that. And so I was always trying to stay 1 step ahead, or 2 steps ahead, or 3 steps, whatever, however many steps ahead I could stay ahead of the game to try to find another place to stay. Now, I'm not sure why this was. I don't know. I would have thought, because I seemed like I lived with half the town, and I would have thought maybe out of one of those families that I stayed with, one of them might have said, hey, you know what, kid, you can stay here permanently and just finish high school, whatever. Well, that was a few years down the road, right? And it was something that I always had to contend with, and I always had to deal with. And so I never felt fully comfortable. I never felt like I fully belonged anywhere. I was like a nomad. I was a gypsy, bouncing from home to home to home to home, never having a place to settle in at, never knowing where my next meal was going to come from, or my next housing situation was going to come from. Now, I had a lot of friends and all that, but the town was only so big, right? And everybody knew everybody. And even now, it's not that big. I was just up there last year, and so it hasn't grown all that much. It's grown a little bit, but not much in 40 years. And a lot of small towns are like that. They don't grow much. My ear's itching here. So, yeah, that was the big concern. I was being told right up front, essentially, that I was going to need to find another place to stay. So right away I had anxiety. Yes, I was happy to have a place to stay that night, or maybe for the next few days or next few weeks, whatever. That was great. I had a roof over my head, I had some clothes on my back, and I had food in my belly, so I was thrilled about all of that. That was great, and I was really happy about it. But everything changed, you see, as winter approached, because there was a greater sense of urgency at that time. And I remember staying with one family. It was September or October or something like that. And I didn't know. I was being told I couldn't stay there much longer. Now it's getting into winter time in Alaska in the mid 1980s. And I got pretty nervous about it. You know, in the back of my mind, I thought, there's no way they're just, you know, all these adults around me, you know, are going to let me just, you know, live out in the cold. Because obviously if I did, I'm not going to survive, right? I'm not going to survive. In the summertime, it was fine because, you know, I could go to the lake. I could sleep in the park on a bench or whatever, you know, that sort of thing. It's fine because it's 90 degrees, actually, believe it or not. It gets up in the 90s up there, you know. Temperature gets up there in Alaska. You wouldn't think that, but it can get pretty toasty up there. So in the summertime, it was fine. You know, I thought to myself, okay, you know, if I have to move or whatever, or I don't have a place to stay, I just go to the park about a half mile down from high school. I can just hang out there, and so forth, and you know, I'll scrounge around for food, whatever I can get, whatever, and I can survive. I can survive. But as winter approached, it became harder. So yeah, about this time, somewhere in here, is when I talked to my mother. She was living in Arizona, and I didn't explain everything to her. I didn't want to burden her. She had a lot of her own struggles and things going on at that time in her life, a lot of challenges of her own that she was dealing with, and I really didn't want to burden my mother. I love my mom, but I didn't want to burden her. I was, you know, I had committed to living with my dad, but and all that, but things didn't work out, and now I was homeless in Alaska, and it was a tough time. So I needed something to get me through. Well, I called my mom. She had a friend in Anchorage who had a car, and he was willing to give it to me or loan it to me, whatever. So he did. I got a ride somehow. I don't even remember how I got there. I got into town. I got into Anchorage. I got the car, picked it up, drove it back to Wasilla. If you don't know where that's at, you can look it up in a map. Wasilla. So that's the town I you know, went to high school in and stuff. And so I drive it back to Wasilla, and I'm thinking, well, where am I gonna, you know, what am I gonna do? I knew I had to move out of that home. This was really the escalation to living in the car, because the pressure was on for me. I couldn't stay there much longer, but winter was approaching, and I needed something. I need some kind of shelter. Well, the car provided me that. And so that essentially, as you know, this is what escalated into me living in the car. Fortunately, I was blessed enough to get that car and have that car as a loaner, and I tried to take care of it. It was a big station wagon, and I could lay down and sleep in it at night and all that. But there was that gap between moving out of my dad's house into the car. There was that gap there where I bounced around, and I never felt like I belonged anywhere. I was just a gypsy kid, you know, bouncing around, and that's what ultimately led to me living in the car. But you know, had I not had that car, I don't know what would have happened. Maybe I would have continued bouncing around from home to home. I'm not sure. Maybe I wouldn't have found a place to stay. There were times at night when I didn't have places to stay, and I was, you know, I would hang out at a convenience store or whatever, you know, and then of course the manager, the owner comes out and said, "Hey kid, what are you doing? You can't be loitering around here," or whatever, you know. And that was embarrassing and humiliating at times, you know. And there weren't a lot of stores there in this small town, especially back then. There's not much more today, but back then there was hardly any, you know. So yeah, that gap between moving out from my dad's home and being on my own, there was a lot of families I lived with there. There was a lot of families, and I'm thankful to them for taking me in, and I'm grateful to them. I'm always grateful to them for taking me in. Yeah, but that's what led to me living in the car. So I have all my other videos up here about this. This is a series that I'm kind of doing about my young life as kind of a homeless teen in small town Alaska in the mid 1980s. Excuse me. And if you haven't seen those yet, you haven't seen the previous videos, you can check those out up here, one side or the other. So like and subscribe, all that good stuff if you like the content. And I really appreciate you watching. I'm very grateful to you. God bless. I'll see you real soon.